The rejection ceremony was where promises went to die. And as Sable stood before the entire kingdom of Valdris, she already knew what was coming. She had known since the moment Alpha King Kale had entered the Great Hall without looking at her. 22 years of waiting. 22 years of being promised to a man she'd never met. Raised to be his perfect mate, trained in every grace and courtesy a future queen would need. None of it mattered. The whispers had reached her weeks ago. The Alpha King would never truly bond with anyone. He couldn't. Something inside him wouldn't allow it. So when he stood before her now, his face carved from ice, his pale blue eyes empty of anything resembling warmth, Sable felt no surprise, only a strange, hollow relief. I, Kale of Valdris, reject the bond promised between our bloodlines, he announced, his voice carrying through the silent hall. I release Sable of Housevorn from all obligations to me and my throne. The crowd held its breath, waiting for her tears, waiting for her to beg, to scream, to fight for the position she'd been groomed for since birth. Instead, Sable lifted her chin, met his frozen gaze, and said simply, I accept your rejection, Alpha King. I thank you for your honesty. Then she turned and walked toward the doors. The hall erupted in gasps. No one had ever simply accepted. No one had ever walked away from an Alpha King with their dignity intact. She was 3 steps from the threshold when the roar shattered the air behind her. Sable spun around. Kale had collapsed to his knees, his hands clawing at his chest. His eyes, once pale blue, had turned completely black. The shadows pooling at his feet seemed to writhe, to reach, to hunger. And when his gaze found hers across the chaos, she heard a voice that wasn't quite his tear through her mind. You cannot leave. Neither of them understood what that moment had awakened. The great hall of Valdris had been built to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings stretched towards darkness. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting shadows that danced like living things across stone walls. The banners of House Valdris hung everywhere, black wolves on fields of silver, watching with embroidered eyes. Sable had been standing on the ceremonial platform for nearly an hour, waiting. Her uncle Morcant stood near the edge of the crowd, his weathered face arranged in careful neutrality. Beside him, her cousin Odessa looked genuinely nervous, on her dark eyes flicking between Sable and the empty throne. Don't embarrass us, Morcant had warned that morning. The alliance depends on this. Your entire value depends on this. Her entire value, as if she were livestock being appraised. Sable supposed she should feel something. Fear, perhaps. Or anticipation. She was about to meet the man she'd been promised to since her birth, the legendary Alpha King whose name was spoken in whispers across the 5 kingdoms. But all she felt was the familiar hollow ache in her chest, where her wolf should have been. The doors burst open. Every head turned. Every conversation died. An alpha presence rolled through the hall like a winter storm, so powerful that several wolves dropped their gazes instinctively. Even the betas stepped backward, their wolves recognizing a predator beyond their comprehension. Sable felt it too, though differently. Where others felt pressure, she felt something else. A strange pulling sensation, as if something deep inside her was straining toward the presence rather than away from it. Then she saw him. Alpha King Kale of Valdris moved through the parting crowd like a blade through silk. He was tall, impossibly tall, with hair the color of a moonless night falling past his shoulders. His features were sharp and beautiful in a way that felt dangerous, like admiring a cliff's edge or a predator's grace. But it was his eyes that made her breath stall in her lungs. Pale blue, empty, cold in a way that went beyond temperature, beyond emotion. These were the eyes of a man who had carved out his own heart and felt nothing but relief at its absence. He walked past the nobles who bowed, past the counselors who scraped. His gaze swept the platform where Sable stood and continued past her without pause, without interest, without a single flicker of recognition. He's not even going to look at me, she realized. Something stirred behind his eyes then. Just for an instant. A shadow that shifted. A darkness that pressed against the ice of his expression. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then it was gone. The high priest cleared his throat nervously. Your Majesty, we are honored by your presence. The ceremony of bonding may now. There will be no bonding. The words fell like stones into still water. Silence crashed over the hall. Sable watched confusion ripple through the crowd, watched Morkant's face drain of color, watched Odessa's hand fly to her mouth. Cale turned to face her then, and for the first time, his eyes actually settled on her. She felt the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure, cold and measuring and utterly without mercy. I, Kyle of Valdris, reject the bond promised between our bloodlines. His voice carried no emotion. He might have been reading grain reports. I release Sable of House Vorn from all obligations to me and my throne. The crowd waited for her reaction with hungry eyes. They wanted tears. They wanted drama. They wanted to witness the humiliation of the wolfless girl who had dared to reach above her station. Sable looked at the Alpha King, at the emptiness in his eyes, and understood something with sudden clarity. He wasn't being cruel. Cruelty required emotion. This was something else entirely. This was a man so carefully controlled, so deliberately frozen, that the rejection was almost mechanical. He's protecting himself, she thought. Or protecting me. From what? I accept your rejection, Alpha King. The words came out steady, surprising even herself. I thank you for your honesty. She dropped into a perfect curtsy, exactly as she'd been trained, then rose and turned toward the doors. The murmuring started immediately. Shock, outrage, disbelief. How dare she simply accept? Is she mad? She should be weeping, begging him to reconsider. Sable kept walking. 1 step, 2, 3. The doors were so close now. Just a few more steps, and she would be free of this nightmare, free to figure out what came next, free to... The roar exploded behind her. She spun around in time to see Alpha King Cale collapse to his knees, his hands clawing at his chest as if trying to tear something out. His eyes had turned completely black. No iris, no white. Just endless shadow that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The shadows at his feet were moving, actually moving, reaching outward like grasping fingers, stretching toward the terrified nobles who scrambled backward. Guards rushed forward but stopped short, clearly uncertain how to help a king who looked like he was being consumed from within. Cale's head snapped up, and his black gaze locked onto Sable with an intensity that froze her in place. When he spoke, his voice was layered with something else, something ancient and hungry and definitely not human. You cannot leave. The shadows surged toward her like a living tide. Chaos erupted through the great hall. Nobles screamed and fled toward the walls. Guards drew swords against an enemy they couldn't fight. The high priest dropped his ceremonial staff and began praying to gods who seemed disinclined to answer. But Sable couldn't move. The shadows had wrapped around her ankles, cold and impossibly solid despite being nothing but darkness. They didn't hurt her. They simply held, keeping her rooted to the spot while Cale fought whatever battle raged inside him. She watched his hands dig into the stone floor, cracking it with the force of his grip. Watched his body convulse, as if two beings were wrestling for control of the same flesh. The blackness in his eyes flickered, pale blue fighting through, then drowning again in shadow. "Get away from him!" someone shouted. She recognized Morkant's voice, but she couldn't see him through the crowd. "The girl has cursed him. Seize her." Cursed him? Sable would have laughed if she wasn't so terrified. And she couldn't curse anyone. She didn't even have a wolf. No one touches her. Cale's voice cut through the chaos. Still layered, still wrong, but more controlled now. The shadows around her ankles loosened slightly. He pushed himself to his feet, and Sable saw sweat beading on his forehead, saw the tremor in his hands, saw the cost of whatever control he'd just wrestled back. The blackness in his eyes receded slowly, blue bleeding back through until only a ring of shadow remained around his irises. "Everyone out," he commanded, "except her." The hall emptied faster than Sable would have believed possible. Within moments, only she and the Alpha King remained, standing in a space that suddenly felt far too vast and far too empty. The shadows had released her completely now, but Sable's legs wouldn't obey her commands to run. "You should be afraid." Kale's voice was his own again, rough and strained but human. "Why aren't you afraid? Would it help if I were?" The question surprised him. She saw it in the slight widening of his eyes, the fractional tilt of his head. "Most people run from me," he said quietly. "Or beg. Or scream. I'm not most people. No." He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're not. What are you?" Sable almost laughed, the question she'd been asked her entire life, always with suspicion, always with disgust. What kind of wolf has no wolf? What kind of creature walks among shifters without the ability to shift? "I'm nothing," she said. "Just a wolfless girl from a minor house who is promised to a king who doesn't want her. That's all." "Wolfless." He repeated the word strangely, as if tasting it. "Is that what they told you?" Before she could ask what he meant, he closed the distance between them. 3 long strides, and he was standing directly before her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his body. Cold, she thought distantly. Alphas run hot. Why is he cold? "I'm going to make you an offer," Kyle said. "You should refuse it. Any sane person would refuse it, but I'm going to make it anyway." Sable lifted her chin to meet his gaze. This close, she could see the shadow still lurking behind his eyes, coiled and waiting. "I'm listening. Stay." The word came out rough, as if torn from somewhere deep. "Not as my mate. I cannot take a mate, not ever. But as something else. A companion. A presence. Something to anchor." He stopped, jaw tightening. "I don't fully understand it yet, but when you accepted my rejection, when you walked away, something inside me broke free that I've kept caged for 20 years. The shadows. Yes. They're alive. In a manner of speaking." His hands clenched at his sides. "They're part of me. A curse that runs in my bloodline. Something my ancestor invited in for power and couldn't expel. It passes to every king, and every king learns to control it through emotional distance, through never caring about anything or anyone." Sable's pulse quickened. "But when I walked away, I felt something," he admitted, and the confession seemed to cost him. "For the first time in 2 decades, I felt something, and the shadow woke." The implications crashed over her. He hadn't rejected her because she was beneath him. He'd rejected her to protect everyone. "If I stay," she said slowly, "what happens?" "I don't know." His honesty was brutal. "Perhaps I learn to control it again with you near. Perhaps the shadow consumes me entirely and I become something monstrous. Perhaps—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "You should refuse. Return to your family. Forget you ever—" "My family." Sable's laugh came out bitter. "My uncle sees me as currency, nothing more. He's probably already calculating how to sell my failed betrothal to the highest bidder. If I go back, I'll be married off to whoever offers the best price, or worse." Kale's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his scent. Interest. Concern. Recognition. "Then stay," he said. "I'll protect you from your uncle, from anyone who would use you. You'll want for nothing. And in exchange? Just your presence. Nothing more." He paused, then added quietly, "You don't have to fear me in that way. I won't touch you. I won't demand anything of your body. I simply need you near. It was madness. Absolute madness. She would be tying herself to a man possessed by ancient darkness, living in a castle full of shadows that had minds of their own. But when she looked at her alternatives, when she pictured Morkant's cold eyes and calculated cruelty, when she imagined being sold to whatever lord would have the wolfless girl as his plaything, "I'll stay," she said. The relief that crossed his features was so brief she might have imagined it. Then the mask was back. Ice and control and careful distance. "Thank you," he said formally. "I'll have chambers prepared for you." He turned to leave, and Sable should have let him go. I should have been grateful for the space. Instead, she asked, "Why me?" Kale paused at the door, not turning around. "I don't know yet. But the shadow does. It recognized something in you the moment you entered this hall. Something it's been waiting for." Then he was gone. Sable stood alone in the empty great hall, blood rushing through her veins, mind spinning. She pressed a hand to her chest where that strange pulling sensation still lingered. And for the first time in her 22 years, she felt something stir in the hollow space where her wolf should have been. Not a wolf. Something else. Something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. Something that was finally waking up. The journey to the King's Keep took 3 days. Sable traveled in a carriage that was finer than anything she'd ever occupied. Velvet cushions and curtained windows and servants who treated her with careful deference. But the luxury felt like a gilded cage. She was being transported to a new prison, one she'd chosen, but a prison nonetheless. Kale rode alongside the carriage on a massive black stallion, never approaching the window, never speaking to her. But she could feel his attention like a physical weight, that strange awareness that prickled across her skin whenever his gaze lingered too long. He's watching for something, she realized. Waiting for something. The shadow hadn't manifested again since that first night. Kale had regained whatever control he'd temporarily lost, his mask firmly back in place. But she'd seen glimpses of darkness flickering in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Brief moments where the shadow pressed against its cage, testing the bars. The King's Keep rose from the mountain like a monument to power. Gray stone towers pierced the clouds, and banners bearing the black wolf snapped in the harsh wind. It was beautiful in a cold, unforgiving way, just like its master. Her chambers were in the east wing, close to the king's but separate. They'd given her rooms that would have housed a princess, a bedchamber with a canopied bed, a sitting room with a fireplace large enough to stand in, and windows that overlooked a garden of night-blooming flowers. She'd barely finished exploring when the shouting started. Sable moved to the door just as it burst open. Morkant stormed in, his face purple with rage, 2 of the king's guards trailing helplessly behind him. "Did you think you could escape me?" Her uncle's voice was a snarl. "Did you think spreading your legs for a king would free you from your obligations?" "I haven't spread anything," Sable said coolly, though her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "And I have no obligations. The king released me publicly, or have you forgotten? You are property of House Vorn." Morkant advanced on her. "You belong to me until I say otherwise. I raised you. I fed you. I kept you alive when everyone else wanted to drown the wolfless abomination in the river." The guards had stopped at the doorway, clearly uncertain whether to intervene in what appeared to be a family dispute. "The king has offered me his protection," Sable said. "The king is unwell." Morkant's smile was ugly. The whole kingdom saw him collapse, saw the darkness take him. How long do you think he'll last? And when he falls? When the shadow finally consumes him like it did his father and his father before him, who do you think will claim you then? The words hit like physical blows. His father before him. The curse had taken other kings. Kale wasn't the first to fight this battle. "You'll come home," Morkant continued, or I'll tell everyone what you really are, what you did to Gavril. I've kept your secret all these years, but secrets have expiration dates, niece. Sable's blood went cold. I didn't do anything to Gavril. Didn't you? Morkant stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. A young man torn apart by a beast no one saw. A young man who just happened to be leaving you for your prettier cousin. And you, covered in his blood, with no memory of what happened. I was attacked too. Something attacked both of us. Something. Morkant's eyes glittered. Or someone. Someone with a monster hiding inside her. Someone whose wolf never emerged because it wasn't a wolf at all. The air in the room dropped several degrees. Sable turned to find Kale standing in the doorway, having arrived silently as death itself. His expression was perfectly blank, but the shadows at his feet had begun to writhe. Lord Morkant. His voice was ice-given sound. You were not granted an audience. Morkant straightened, composing his face into something approaching respect. Your Majesty, I was simply discussing family matters with my niece. Your niece is under my protection. Kale stepped into the room, and the shadows followed him, pooling outward like spilled ink. Family matters no longer concern you. With respect, Your Majesty, she remains part of House Vorn. Certain obligations are severed. Kale's eyes flickered with darkness. As of this moment, Sable of House Vorn is a ward of the Crown. She answers to no one but me. If you contact her again without my express permission, I will consider it treason. Morkant's face contorted, but he was smart enough not to challenge an Alpha King directly. As you wish, Your Majesty. He shot Sable a look that promised this wasn't over, then bowed and retreated. The guards escorted him out. The door closed. Sable released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Thank you. Kale didn't respond immediately. He was studying her with that unnerving intensity, as if trying to see through her skin to whatever lay beneath. What did he mean? He asked finally. About Gavril. About what you did. Nothing. The word came out too quickly. Sable. Just her name, but the weight of command behind it was undeniable. She turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. There was a boy. Gavril. We were betrothed when I was 16. He was kind. Or I thought he was. Then he fell in love with my cousin Odessa. And one night, something attacked us in the woods. Gavril died. I was found covered in his blood with no memory of what happened. Morkant kept it quiet to preserve the family's reputation, but he's never let me forget that I might have. She couldn't finish the sentence. The silence stretched between them. Then Kale spoke, his voice unexpectedly gentle. Do you believe you killed him? I don't know. Sable's voice faltered. I don't remember anything. One moment we were walking, and the next I was waking up screaming with his body beside me and blood everywhere. My own claws were... She stopped, realizing what she'd just said. Your claws? Kale moved closer. I thought you were wolfless. I am. Sable shook her head. My wolf never emerged. But that night, my hands had shifted. Just my hands, into something that wasn't quite wolf claws. And then they changed back. And they've never shifted since. Kale went very still. The shadows at his feet surged upward suddenly, wrapping around his legs, climbing his torso. His eyes flickered between blue and black, as if two beings were fighting for dominance. Kale. Sable stepped toward him instinctively. Stay back. His voice was strained. The shadow is... It recognizes... Recognizes what? The darkness in his eyes won. When he looked at her now, and it wasn't Kale looking out. It was something older, something that had seen civilizations rise and fall. Spirit Wolf, the shadow said through Kale's mouth. We've been waiting for you for 300 years. Then Kale collapsed, and the shadows went wild. Hours later, After the healers had come and gone, after Kale had been carried to his chambers still unconscious, Sable sat alone in her rooms trying to process what had happened. A knock at the door made her jump. Odessa slipped inside, her delicate features pale with worry. "I came as soon as I heard. Are you all right?" "I don't know." Sable laughed weakly. "Nothing makes sense anymore." Odessa sat beside her on the bed, and for a moment, she looked like the cousin Sable remembered from childhood. Before Gavril, before everything had broken between them. "I need to tell you something," Odessa said quietly. "About the Alpha King, about what's really inside him. The shadow. He told me." "Did he tell you what happens to those who get close to it?" Odessa's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "There was a woman. 3 years ago. A noble woman who caught his interest. He tried to keep his distance, but she was persistent. And eventually... Eventually what?" Odessa's eyes glistened with tears. "The shadow took over. Just for one night. When Kale woke up in the morning, she was dead. Torn apart. He doesn't remember doing it, but the blood was on his hands, under his nails." Sable's stomach turned to ice. "He's not evil," Odessa continued quickly. "I've watched him carry that guilt every day since. He rejected you at the ceremony to protect you, don't you see? He was trying to keep you safe. But now that you're here, now that the shadow has awakened again..." "What are you saying?" Odessa gripped Sable's hands, her fingers cold and trembling. "I'm saying that the last woman who got close to him was found torn to pieces in his bed. And he didn't even remember doing it." 3 days passed before Kale woke. Sable spent most of that time in her chambers, replaying Odessa's warning over and over in her mind. A woman torn apart. Blood under his nails. He didn't remember doing it. She should leave. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape this cursed castle and its cursed king before she became the next body found in his bed. But she couldn't. Something kept her rooted here. Some pull she didn't understand. And every time she considered fleeing, she remembered the look in Kale's eyes before the shadow had taken over. Not hunger, not malice. Fear. He was terrified of himself. On the 4th morning, a servant appeared at her door with a summons. The Alpha King was awake and requesting her presence in the throne room. Sable's pulse quickened as she followed the servant through winding corridors. She'd expected a private meeting, perhaps in his study or chambers. The throne room suggested something else entirely. She understood when she stepped through the massive doors. The throne room was packed. Nobles filled every available space, their whispers creating a constant hum of speculation. Counselors stood in clusters, shooting glances at each other. And at the far end, seated on a throne of black stone, was Kale. He looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his skin had taken on an ashen pallor. But his posture was rigid, controlled. Every inch the Alpha King, despite whatever battle raged inside him. A public appearance, Sable realized. He's showing the kingdom he's still in control. The whispers intensified as she walked down the center aisle. She caught fragments of conversation, none of it kind. "That's the wolfless girl. She did something to him at the ceremony. My cousin says she's a witch. House Vorn wants her returned. They're saying she's stolen property." Sable kept her chin high, her expression neutral. She'd spent her entire life being whispered about. This was nothing new. She stopped at the base of the throne and dropped into a curtsy. "Your Majesty, you summoned me. Rise." Kale's voice was steady, but she could hear the strain beneath it. "Come closer." She climbed the steps until she stood beside the throne. This close. She could see the fine tremor in his hands, the way his jaw clenched with effort. The shadow was pressing against its cage, and holding it back was costing him everything. "My lords and ladies," Kale announced, his voice carrying through the hall. "I have gathered you here to address the rumors that have spread through my kingdom like disease. The whispers died immediately. 3 days ago, I experienced an episode during the rejection ceremony. Many of you witnessed it. Many more have heard exaggerated accounts of what transpired. His eyes swept the crowd with cold authority. I will address this once, and only once. He rose from the throne, and Sable saw several nobles flinch backward. The shadow that dwells within my bloodline awakened. This is not unprecedented. Every king of Valdris has carried this burden. Every king has learned to control it. He paused, letting the words sink in. What happened at the ceremony was unexpected but not catastrophic. I remain in full control of my faculties and my kingdom. A counselor near the front stepped forward. Your Majesty, with respect, the shadow has never manifested so publicly before. The people are afraid. The people should save their fear for genuine threats. Kale's voice hardened. The northern pacts have been raiding our borders. The trade agreements with the eastern kingdoms expire in 6 months. These are matters worthy of concern. My momentary lapse is not. Another voice rose from the crowd. And what of the girl? Sable felt every eye in the room turn toward her. The speaker was a nobleman she didn't recognize, silver-haired and sharp-featured. House Vorn has formally requested her return. Lord Morcant claims she is their property that she was promised to you as part of an alliance that you yourself dissolved. Lord Morcant's claims are irrelevant. Kale's tone could have frozen fire. I dissolved the betrothal, not her obligations to me. She remains under my protection as a ward of the crown. But surely... Furthermore, Kale's voice rose, cutting off the protest. Any suggestion that she caused or contributed to my episode is not only false but treasonous. Lady Sable is under my protection. Any action against her will be treated as an action against me personally. The hall went completely silent. Air lodged in Sable's throat. He was doing more than defending her. He was making her untouchable. Anyone who moved against her now would be challenging the Alpha King directly. Your Majesty. A woman's voice this time, older and carrying the weight of authority. Sable turned to see a severe-looking female with iron-gray hair and sharp green eyes. Forgive me, but the council must ask. If the girl is not your mate, not your betrothed, what exactly is she? Kale looked at Sable then, and for just a moment the mask slipped. She saw exhaustion, fear, and something else. Something almost like hope. She is necessary, he said simply. That is all you need to know. The council meeting continued for another hour, but Sable barely heard any of it. Her mind kept circling back to that single word. Necessary. Not useful. Not convenient. Necessary. As if her presence was the only thing keeping him from falling apart entirely. When the hall finally emptied, Kale remained on his throne, his head bowed, and his breathing labored. The effort of maintaining control for so long had clearly drained him. You should rest, Sable said quietly. I can't. He didn't look up. If I sleep, I dream. If I dream, the shadow slips its cage. What do you dream about? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, death. Always death. The shadow shows me everyone I've ever failed, everyone I've ever hurt. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. It shows me what I did to Lyris. The dead woman. The one Odessa had warned her about. Tell me about her, Sable said. Kale's head came up, surprise breaking through his exhaustion. Why would you want to know? Because you're carrying it alone. And whatever happened, whatever the shadow did, I don't think you've ever told anyone the truth. Something cracked in his expression. Just for a moment. Then the mask reassembled, but the ice behind it seemed thinner somehow. Not here, he said. There are too many ears in this castle, too many eyes. He rose from the throne and extended his hand to her. Sable hesitated only a moment before taking it. His skin was cold, so cold, but his grip was gentle. "Come," he said. "I'll show you." He led her through passages she hadn't known existed, secret corridors hidden behind tapestries and false walls. They descended deeper into the mountain until the air grew thick and the torchlight seemed inadequate against the pressing darkness. Finally, they emerged into a chamber carved from black stone. In the center stood a single tomb, its surface covered in symbols Sable didn't recognize. "This is where the first shadow was bound," Kyle said. 300 years ago, my ancestor Aldrich made a deal with something ancient, power in exchange for a vessel. He thought he could control it. His laugh was bitter. He was wrong. Sable approached the tomb, drawn by something she couldn't name. The symbols seemed to pulse faintly as she neared, as if responding to her presence. "The shadow passes from king to king," Kale continued. "When a king dies, it transfers to his heir. There's no escape, no cure. The only way to survive is to feel nothing, to care about nothing, to want nothing. That's why you rejected me." "Yes." He moved to stand beside her, both of them staring down at the tomb. "I thought if I never looked at you, never spoke to you, the shadow would have nothing to exploit. But when you accepted the rejection, when you walked away with such dignity, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 20 years. What? Admiration." The word seemed to cost him. Respect. And something else I still don't have a name for. The symbols on the tomb pulsed brighter. Kale grabbed Sable's arm and pulled her backward, placing himself between her and the tomb. The shadows at his feet had begun to writhe again, but this time they weren't reaching toward her. They were reaching toward the tomb. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice tight. "This has never happened before." The stone lid of the tomb began to crack. The crack spread across the tomb like lightning through stone. Kale shoved Sable behind him, his body rigid, his shadows surging forward as if preparing for battle. But the darkness pouring from the fracturing tomb wasn't attacking. It was reaching toward her. "Don't move," Kale commanded. But his voice was strained. "Whatever happens, don't move." The shadows from the tomb stretched past him as if he weren't there, wrapping around Sable's ankles just as they had in the Great Hall. But this time, instead of cold, she felt warmth. Instead of fear, she felt recognition. "Welcome home," something whispered in her mind. "We've waited so long." Then the tomb exploded. When Sable opened her eyes, she was lying on her back with Kale crouched over her, his face inches from hers, his expression wild with fear. "Sable." His hands cupped her face, checking for injuries. "Sable, can you hear me?" "I'm fine." Her voice came out hoarse. "What happened?" Kale sat back on his heels and she saw that the tomb behind him had collapsed into rubble. The shadows that had emerged from it were gone, absorbed somehow into the darkness that already existed in the chamber. "I don't know." He looked shaken in a way she'd never seen before. "The ancient shadow, the original binding, it broke. And instead of attacking us, it—" He trailed off, staring at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "It what?" "It went into you." Sable's blood went cold. She pressed her hands against her chest, expecting to feel something different, and some foreign presence crawling beneath her skin. But all she felt was the same hollow ache that had lived there her entire life. No, not quite the same. The hollowness felt less empty now, as if something had settled into it, filling spaces she hadn't known were vacant. "I don't feel any different," she said uncertainly. "Your eyes." Kale's voice was barely audible. "They changed. Just for a moment. And they turned silver." "Silver?" "Like moonlight." He reached out as if to touch her face, then stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air between them. "The ancient shadow, the one that started all of this, it chose you. I don't understand why, but it chose you." Sable pushed herself upright, her head spinning. "You said the shadow passes from king to king. How can it be in both of us? It can't. Kale's brow furrowed. Unless... He stood abruptly, pacing the chamber, his mind clearly racing. The shadows at his feet moved with him, agitated, uncertain. The shadow inside me isn't the original, he said slowly, working through the logic. It's a fragment, a piece that split off, and has been replicating through my bloodline for generations. But the core, the source, it's been sleeping in that tomb for 300 years. Waiting for what? He stopped pacing, turned to look at her with an intensity that made her shiver. Waiting for you. His voice was rough. The shadow called you a spirit wolf. I didn't understand what that meant. But now... He moved toward her, crouching down to her level. There are legends, ancient stories about wolves who weren't quite wolves. Beings who existed before the packs, before the hierarchy, before any of the structures we know. They were called spirit wolves because they weren't bound by physical forms. They could bond with shadows, with light, with the very essence of existence itself. That's impossible. Sable shook her head. I'm wolfless. I can't even shift. Can't you? Kale's gaze dropped to her hands. You told me your hands shifted once. The night Gavril died. The memory hit her like a physical blow. Blood. Screaming. Claws that weren't quite wolf claws, emerging from fingers that shouldn't have been able to change. That was different, she whispered. I was terrified. I thought I was dying. Exactly. Kyle took her hands in his and she startled at the warmth. He wasn't cold anymore. His skin felt almost feverish. Spirit wolves don't shift like we do. They don't have a separate beast inside them. They transform only in moments of extreme emotion, when the soul itself demands a different form. How do you know all this? Because the shadow knows. His thumbs traced circles on her palms, an absent gesture that sent sparks up her arms. It's been feeding me fragments of memories since you arrived, showing me things about the ancient world, about what spirit wolves were capable of. And what were they capable of? His grip tightened on her hands, bonding with shadows, controlling them, purifying them. He met her eyes, and the hope in his gaze was almost painful to witness. Destroying them entirely. The implication crashed over her. You think I can break your curse? I think you might be the only one who can. Sable pulled her hands free, her heart pounding. This was too much. Too fast. She was just a wolfless girl from a minor house, raised by an uncle who despised her, blamed for a death she couldn't remember causing. She wasn't a legend. She wasn't a savior. She was no one. Stop. Kale's voice was soft, but it cut through her spiraling thoughts. Stop whatever you're telling yourself right now. You don't know what I'm thinking. I know exactly what you're thinking. He rose, offering his hand again. You're thinking that you're nothing. That you're broken. That you couldn't possibly be what I'm describing. He waited until she met his eyes. I thought the same thing about myself for 20 years, that I was nothing but a vessel for darkness, that I couldn't possibly be anything more than a monster waiting to happen. Sable hesitated, then took his hand. Let him pull her to her feet. What changed? She asked. You walked away. His voice was hardly more than breath now. You accepted my rejection with such grace, such dignity, and you walked away. And I realized that if someone could face the Alpha King's rejection without breaking, and then perhaps I didn't have to break either. They stood there in the ruins of the ancient tomb, hands clasped, breathing the same air. Sable could feel his pulse beneath his skin, racing as fast as her own. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. But I'm more scared of losing you than I am of anything else. The simple honesty of it shattered something inside her. A wall she'd been building for years, ever since Gavril's death, ever since she'd accepted that no one would ever want her, ever see her as anything more than a burden. Kale. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way she wasn't prepared for. We should go back. His voice was rough. Before someone notices we're missing. He didn't release her hand as they climbed back through the hidden passages, didn't let go as they emerged into the castle's main corridors. Only when they reached her chambers did he finally step back, creating distance between them. Rest, he said. Tomorrow we begin training. If you truly are a spirit wolf, if the ancient shadow chose you for a reason, we need to understand what you're capable of. Sable nodded, but as he turned to leave, she called out. Kale. He paused, not quite looking at her. What you said before. About Lyris. About what the shadow did. She swallowed hard. You never told me what happened. His shoulders tensed. For a long moment he didn't speak. I loved her, he said finally, his voice hollow. Or I thought I did. And the shadow used that love to destroy her. He turned his head just enough that she could see his profile, the rigid set of his jaw. I woke up with her blood on my hands and no memory of the night before. The shadow had consumed me completely, worn my body like a suit, and murdered the only person I'd ever cared about. That wasn't you, wasn't it? His laugh was bitter. The shadow is part of me. Its hunger is my hunger. Its violence is my violence. I can cage it, control it, but I can never separate myself from it completely. Then let me help you. He turned fully now, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. That's what I'm afraid of. That you'll try to help me, and the shadow will destroy you too. Before she could respond, he was gone. Sable stood in her doorway for a long time, heart aching, mind racing. Then she felt it, a stirring in that newly filled hollow space inside her. A presence that wasn't quite her own, wasn't quite foreign either. He's wrong, the ancient shadow whispered. You weren't brought here to be destroyed. You were brought here to save him. And deep in her chest, something that might have been hope began to bloom. The training began at dawn. Kale led her to a courtyard she'd never seen before, hidden behind the eastern towers, surrounded by walls high enough that no one could observe what happened within. The space was bare except for training dummies and weapon racks, but the ground was scorched in places, scarred by battles Sable couldn't imagine. Before we start, Kyle said, his tone formal, distant, as if their conversation in the tomb chamber had never happened. You need to understand what we're attempting. Spirit wolves haven't existed for 300 years. Everything I know comes from fragments of legend and whatever the shadow deigns to show me. Then we learn together. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe. Or gratitude. Very well. He moved to stand across from her, creating several feet of distance between them. The shadow inside you is the original source, the core from which all other fragments descended. If my understanding is correct, it bonded with you because you're compatible, because something in your nature can contain it without being consumed. How do I access it? That's the question. He began circling her slowly, his gaze assessing. My shadow responds to emotion. Strong feeling feeds it, strengthens it, and makes it harder to control. But spirit wolves supposedly work differently. They channel emotion into transformation. They don't suppress their feelings. They transmute them. Sable closed her eyes, trying to feel the presence inside her. It was there. She could sense it now. A warmth curled in her chest like a sleeping creature. But it didn't respond to her probing. Nothing's happening, she said. Try thinking about something that makes you angry. She thought about Morkant, about the years of cruelty, the constant reminders that she was worthless, the threats that hung over her head like executioner's blades. The warmth stirred, but nothing more. Anger isn't enough. Kale's voice was closer now. The shadow responds to deeper emotions. Fear, grief, love. Sable thought about Gavril, about waking up covered in blood with no memory of what had happened, about the years of not knowing whether she was a murderer. The warmth pulsed stronger, and she felt something shift behind her eyes. There, Kale said sharply. Your eyes changed. Do you feel it? I feel something. Sable's voice came out strange, layered with harmonics that didn't belong to her. It's moving. Let it move. Don't fight it. She tried to relax, to let the warmth spread through her body, but as it reached her hands, panic flared. The last time this had happened, Gavril had died. The presence retreated immediately, curling back into its resting place. I can't. Sable's breath came in gasps. Every time I get close, I remember what happened. I remember the blood. Kale was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders steadying her. Breathe. Just breathe. You don't understand. Tears burned in her eyes. What if I killed him? What if I'm a monster and I don't even know it? You're not a monster. How can you be sure? Because I know what monsters look like. His voice was fierce. I've been one. I've done things the shadow won't let me forget. Things that would make you run screaming from this castle. And you, Sable, you are nothing like what I've become. She looked up at him. At this cursed king who had rejected her to protect her, who had defended her before his entire court, who was now trying to teach her to access powers she didn't understand. Tell me about Lyris, she said suddenly. Tell me everything. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Why? Because you're asking me to face my worst memory. I need to know you're willing to do the same. For a long moment he was silent. Then he released her shoulders and stepped back, his expression closing off. Lyris was a lady of the southern court, beautiful, bold. She pursued me despite my reputation, despite my warnings. She said she wasn't afraid of the darkness inside me. His jaw tightened. I should have sent her away. I knew better. But I was lonely. So desperately lonely, and she made me feel almost human. Sable listened without interrupting. We were together for 3 months. The happiest 3 months of my life. His voice splintered slightly. I was careful. I never let my guard down. Never let the shadow slip its cage. But Lyris wanted more. She wanted passion, intensity, the kind of love that consumes. And one night, I gave in. What happened? I don't remember. The words came out hollow. I remember kissing her. I remember feeling happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. Ah, and then nothing until I woke up with her body beside me, torn apart, her blood cooling on my skin. Sable's heart shattered for him. The shadow took over. Yes. He met her eyes and the grief in his gaze was bottomless. It used my happiness as a doorway. The moment I let myself feel something real, it broke free and destroyed the source of that feeling. That's why you rejected me. Understanding dawned. That's why you insisted you could never love me. Because love gives the shadow power. Love gives it a target. He turned away from her, his shoulders rigid. The shadow doesn't just want to possess me, it wants to isolate me. It destroys anything I care about because my suffering feeds it. My grief makes it stronger. They stood in silence as the implications settled over her. Then we won't fall in love, Sable said quietly. Kale laughed, but there was no humor in it. If it were that simple. What do you mean? He turned back to face her, and the raw honesty in his expression stole her breath. I've spent 3 weeks trying not to feel anything for you, he said. 3 weeks watching you navigate a hostile court with grace and dignity. 3 weeks learning that you're kind despite every reason to be bitter. Brave, despite every reason to be afraid. Beautiful, despite believing yourself worthless. Kale. I'm failing, Sable. His voice broke on her name. Every day I fail a little more, and the shadow knows it. It's waiting. watching, ready to strike the moment I stop fighting. She should have stepped back, should have created distance, should have protected them both from what was building between them. Instead, she moved closer. Then maybe we stop fighting, she said softly. You don't understand what you're suggesting. I understand perfectly. She reached up to touch his face, and he shuddered at the contact. The shadow is part of you. Pushing it down, caging it. That's been your strategy for 20 years. But it hasn't worked. It just waits for moments of weakness and strikes harder. So what's your solution? Integration. The ancient shadow stirred inside her, feeding her words she didn't fully understand. You've been treating the darkness like an enemy. What if it's not? What if it's a part of you that's been wounded, traumatized, lashing out because that's all it knows? You're talking about accepting a monster into my soul. I'm talking about healing. Her thumb traced his cheekbone, and she felt him lean into the touch despite himself. Maybe that's what spirit wolves do. Maybe that's why the ancient shadow chose me. Not to destroy your darkness, but to help you integrate it. And if you're wrong? If the shadow consumes us both? Sable smiled, surprising herself with the calm that had settled over her. Then at least, we won't be alone. Something shifted in his expression. The ice cracked, and beneath it, she glimpsed the man he might have been without the curse. Warm, hopeful, capable of love so deep it terrified him. You're going to destroy me, he whispered. One way or another, you're going to destroy me. Maybe. She rose on her toes to press a gentle kiss to his forehead. But maybe I'll save you instead. When she pulled back, his eyes were wet. He caught her hand before she could step away, pressing his lips to her palm, her wrist, the inside of her elbow. I don't deserve this, he said against her skin. Neither do I. But here we are. They trained for hours after that. Kyle pushed her harder than before, but there was a new energy between them, a connection that made the work feel less like struggle and more like dance. By sunset, Sable could access the warmth at will, though she still couldn't fully transform. Progress, Kale said, something like pride in his voice. They walked back to the castle together, close enough that their shoulders brushed with every step. Dinner in my chambers tonight, he said. It wasn't quite a question, but his tone made it clear she could refuse. Yes. The meal was simple, but intimate. Candles flickered on a small table by the window. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, dreams they'd abandoned long ago. Tell me about your mother, Kale asked. Sable's chest tightened. I barely remember her. She died when I was 5. Morkant told me she was weak. That weakness was why I turned out wrong. You're not wrong. Neither are you. His hand found hers across the table. This time, neither of them pulled away. I want to show you something, he said. Something no one else has seen since Lyris died. He led her through his private chambers to a door she hadn't noticed before. Behind it was a small garden, somehow existing inside the mountain, lit by bioluminescent flowers that glowed silver and blue in the darkness. I grew these for her, Kale said quietly. After she died, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I needed something to nurture, something that wouldn't die just because I cared about it. Sable's throat tightened. They're beautiful. They're alive because I never let myself love them too much. He turned to face her, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. I'm tired of not loving things, Sable. I'm tired of protecting myself at the cost of everything that makes life worth living. Then stop protecting yourself. If I do that, you could die. If you don't, you definitely will. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The shadow feeds on isolation, on grief, on lovelessness. What if love is actually the cure? What if that's what the ancient shadow has been trying to tell us? That's a beautiful theory. His voice was rough, but theories don't protect against monsters. Neither does running. She kissed him. The moment their lips met, the world shattered. Power exploded through her. Silver and shadow, warmth and cold. She felt the ancient presence inside her surge forward, felt Kale's darkness rise to meet it. They were connected, not just physically, but spiritually. Two halves of something that had been broken for 3 centuries. Kale's arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, deeper. The kiss was desperate, hungry, everything they'd been denying since the moment she'd walked away from his rejection. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, his eyes had changed. Half blue, half silver. And the shadows at his feet weren't reaching toward her anymore. They were wrapped around her protectively. What just happened? Sable breathed. Before Kale could answer, a scream tore through the night. They rushed to the window just in time to see flames erupt from the east wing of the castle. Her chambers. Her rooms were on fire. And through the smoke, Sable saw a figure she recognized standing in the courtyard below, watching the flames with satisfaction. Morkant had found another way to reach her. Sable ran. Through corridors filling with smoke, past servants scrambling to contain the blaze, toward the east wing where flames consumed everything she owned. Not that she cared about possessions, but if Morkant was here, if he'd found a way past the king's guards, then no one in this castle was safe. Kale kept pace beside her, his shadows stretching ahead like scouts, probing the darkness for threats. They burst into the courtyard just as the roof of Sable's chambers collapsed inward, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Guards surrounded Morkant, but none had touched him. He stood calm and unthreatened, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Nephew." Morkant's voice carried across the chaos with unsettling clarity. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." "Nephew?" Sable's blood turned to ice. Kale's jaw tightened. "Lord Morkant is my mother's brother by blood, but your connection to him comes through his marriage into House Vorn. We share no blood between us." The revelation crashed over her. Morkant wasn't just her tormentor. He was connected to the royal bloodline, connected to the curse. But at least she and Kale weren't related. "Family reunions are so touching," Morkant continued, stepping forward despite the guard's warnings. "But I'm afraid we don't have time for sentiment. I've come to collect what belongs to me." "Sable belongs to no one," Kale growled. The shadows at his feet surged forward, but Morkant raised a hand and they stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. "Impressive," Morkant said. "You've learned some control. But did you really think you were the only one who inherited our grandmother's gifts?" Sable stared at him. "You have shadow magic?" "I have enough." Morkant's smile widened. "Enough to start fires without being seen. Enough to slip past royal guards. Enough to ensure that my dear niece fulfills her true purpose." "What purpose?" Kale demanded. "You haven't figured it out yet? How disappointing." Morkant began walking a slow circle around them, the guards parting before him as if compelled. "The curse on your bloodline, nephew. The shadow that's been devouring your kings for 300 years. Where do you think it came from? Aldrich made a deal." "Aldrich was a fool who got manipulated." Morkant's voice hardened. "The shadow didn't come from some ancient entity. It came from our family. From a Vorn ancestor who was betrayed by the first Alpha King and swore revenge on his entire bloodline." Sable's mind raced. "You're saying a Vorn created the curse?" "I'm saying a Vorn is the curse." Morkant stopped directly in front of her, his eyes glittering with malice. "The shadow that lives inside every king of Valdris? It's the imprisoned soul of Morwen Vorn, the witch who loved Aldrich and was executed for that love. She didn't die. She transformed. And she's been feeding on royal blood ever since." "That's impossible," Kale said, but his voice wavered. "Is it? Think about what the shadow does. It prevents the kings from loving. How it destroys anyone they care about. It feeds on their grief and isolation." Morcant's smile was terrible. That's not a random curse. That's a woman scorned, taking her revenge across generations. Sable felt the ancient presence inside her stir. Not with denial, with recognition. He speaks truth, the shadow whispered. I was Morwen. I am still Morwen, and I have been waiting for someone who could finally set me free. The spirit wolf, Sable breathed. That's why you chose me, not to destroy the curse but to end it properly, to give Morwen peace. Yes, the shadow confirmed, you carry my essence now. You can do what no king ever could. You can forgive on behalf of those who wronged me. You can release me from my own hatred. But Morcant was shaking his head. Forgiveness? Peace? No, no, no. That's not what's going to happen at all. He pulled something from his cloak, a dagger made of black crystal that seemed to drink the light around it. Morwen's soul is power. Immense power. Power that's been wasted on tormenting kings when it could be used for so much more. What have you done? Kale's voice was deadly quiet. I've spent 20 years preparing for this moment, studying the old texts, learning the rituals. Morcant pointed the dagger at Sable. The spirit wolf can release Morwen's soul, yes. But if I kill the spirit wolf while she's channeling that release, the power doesn't dissipate. It transfers to whoever holds this blade. You want to absorb the curse. I want to absorb the power behind the curse. Imagine it, nephew. 300 years of accumulated shadow magic, enough to topple kingdoms. I to reshape the world. Morcant's eyes blazed with fanatical hunger. And all I need is your little wolfless bride. He lunged. Sable didn't think. The ancient shadow surged through her, responding to her terror. And suddenly, she wasn't standing in the courtyard anymore. She was somewhere else, a space between heartbeats where time moved like honey. You must choose, Morwen's voice echoed around her. I can give you power to fight, but if you use it in anger, you become what I became, another soul trapped by hatred. Then how do I stop him? Not with violence, with truth. Morcant isn't just hungry for power, he's running from something. Find what he's hiding and you'll find his weakness. Time snapped back into motion. Morcant's dagger sliced toward her throat, but Kale was faster. He caught Morcant's wrist. The shadows around him exploding outward with enough force to send both men skidding across the courtyard stones. Run! Kale shouted. But Sable didn't run. Instead, she reached for the warmth inside her, for the presence that had been sleeping her whole life. And she pulled. Silver light erupted from her skin. Everyone in the courtyard froze, momentarily blinded. When their vision cleared, Sable stood transformed. Not into a wolf, not entirely, but into something between. Her eyes blazed silver. Her hands had shifted into claws that gleamed like moonlight. And behind her, spreading like wings, were shapes made of shadow and light intertwined. Impossible, Morcant gasped. You wanted to know what I am. Sable's voice resonated with harmonics that didn't belong to the mortal world. I'm the spirit wolf, and the bridge between shadow and light. And I can see everything you're hiding, Uncle. She stepped toward him, and with each step images flashed through her mind. Morwen's memories? Yes, but also something else. Something Morcant had buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it himself. You killed Gavril, she said. Morcant's face went pale. You've had shadow magic your whole life. Just a fragment, barely enough to matter. But enough to start a fire. Enough to tear a young man apart and make it look like a beast attack. Sable's voice shook with revelation. You murdered him because he was going to expose you. He'd discovered what you were planning, hadn't he? He'd found your research about the curse. You don't know what you're talking about. I can see it. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained steady. I can see everything now. Gavril wasn't leaving me for Odessa. He was coming to warn me about you. And you killed him before he could. He was going to ruin everything. The mask finally cracked. Morkant's composure shattered, revealing the desperate, twisted creature beneath. 20 years of planning, 20 years of positioning myself, of waiting for the right spirit wolf to be born, and that foolish boy was going to destroy it all because he developed a conscience. I didn't kill him. The words emerged as a sob. All these years I thought I was a monster. I thought I'd murdered the man I was supposed to marry. And it was you. It was always you. The ancient shadow inside her pulsed with shared grief. Morwen had been accused of things she didn't do, too, executed for crimes that existed only in jealous minds. Now you understand, Morwen whispered. Now you know why I became what I became. Injustice has a weight. It can crush a soul until hatred is all that remains. But it doesn't have to, Sable said aloud. You were wronged, Morwen, terribly wronged. But your revenge has hurt innocent people. Kale, Lyris, all the kings who came before. They were Aldrich's bloodline. They deserved to suffer. Did they? Did Kale deserve to grow up unable to feel love? Did a young woman deserve to be torn apart because she made a king smile? The presence inside her wavered. For the first time, Sable felt Morwen's certainty crack. I was in such pain, the ancient voice whispered. For so long, I forgot there was anything else. I know. Sable closed her eyes, letting compassion flood through her. I know what it's like to be blamed for something you didn't do. To be treated as a monster when you're just a victim. But we have a choice, Morwen. We can let the pain define us, or we can let it go. No! Morkant charged forward, dagger raised. You will not take this from me. But Kale was there. The Alpha King intercepted Morkant with the full force of his shadows, driving him backward, pinning him against the courtyard wall. The darkness wrapped around Morkant like chains, squeezing until the dagger dropped from his fingers. It's over, Kyle said. You've lost. Have I? Morkant laughed, blood trickling from his mouth. The curse still exists. Morwen still feeds on your bloodline. Even if you kill me, even if you lock me away forever, that will never change. Yes, it will. Sable stepped forward, placing her hand on Kale's arm. Because Morwen is ready to move on. Aren't you? The silence stretched eternal. Then, slowly, the ancient presence inside her began to shift. To soften. To release. I'm so tired, Morwen admitted. 300 years of hatred, and what has it brought me? More pain, more suffering, more loneliness. Then let go, Sable whispered. Let me help you find peace. If I leave, your power leaves with me. You'll be wolfless again. Truly wolfless this time. I don't need power. I need freedom. For both of us. Morkant screamed as he realized what was happening. No, the power is mine. I earned it. I waited. His voice cut off as Kale's shadows tightened around his throat. Sable closed her eyes and opened her heart. She thought about forgiveness, about release, about all the pain she'd carried for years that had never truly belonged to her. And she let it go. Silver light erupted from her body, brighter than before, bright enough to illuminate the entire castle. She felt Morwen's presence flow through her and out, finally free after 3 centuries of imprisonment. Thank you, Morwen's voice echoed, fading like morning mist. Tell Kale. Tell all the kings who come after. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Love is not weakness. Love is the only thing that ever mattered. Then she was gone. Sable collapsed. She woke to warmth. For a moment, Sable couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. She only knew that she felt safe. Truly safe. For the first time in her memory. Then she opened her eyes and found Kale sitting beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, his expression haggard with worry. You're awake. His voice faltered. Thank the gods. You're awake. How long? Her throat felt like sandpaper. 3 days. He lifted a cup of water to her lips, supporting her head while she drank. The healers didn't know if you'd recover. The amount of power that moved through you. Morwen. Sable's memories rushed back. Is she gone? Yes. Kale's eyes glistened. The curse is broken. Completely broken. I felt it leave. Felt the shadow that's been inside me since birth just dissolve. Like it was never there. Sable struggled to sit up, and Kale helped her, arranging pillows behind her back with careful attention. And Morkant? In the dungeons. He'll stand trial for his crimes, including Gavril's murder. Odessa has agreed to testify about everything she witnessed over the years. Odessa? Surprise flickered through her. But she warned me about you. She was afraid. Kale's expression softened. Afraid of what Morkant would do if she didn't play along. But when she saw what happened in the courtyard, when she realized you'd proven your innocence, she came forward with everything. Her testimony alone is enough to ensure Morkant never sees freedom again. Relief washed through Sable, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Then it's over. It's really over. Not quite. Kyle's hand tightened on hers. There's still the matter of us. Us? He stood and moved to the window, his back to her. In the morning light, she could see that he looked different. Not just rested, but transformed. The permanent tension in his shoulders was gone. The shadows that had always lurked in his expression had lifted. The curse is broken, he said quietly. Which means I'm free to love without fear. Free to marry. Free to produce heirs without worrying that my children will suffer as I did. Sable's heart leapt. That's wonderful. Is it? He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes left her breathless. Because it means I have to make a choice. A real choice. Not one forced by ancient magic or political necessity. Kale. I rejected you publicly. He crossed the room, kneeling beside her bed so their eyes were level. I humiliated you before my entire court. I offered you a position as my companion, my anchor, but never as my equal. You deserve better than what I've given you. You saved my life. Multiple times. And you saved mine. You saved my entire bloodline. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. Which is why I need to do this properly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring. Not the ornate, politically significant jewelry she might have expected, but something simpler. A band of silver set with a single stone that caught the light like captured moonlight. This was my mother's, Kale said. The only thing I have left of her that Morkant didn't taint with his schemes. She would have loved you, I think. She always said the strongest wolves were the ones who'd been tested by fire. Her lungs refused to work. What are you asking? I'm asking you to marry me. Not as a political arrangement, not as a curse-breaking strategy, just as two people who somehow found each other in the darkness and decided to build something in the light. Kale, I'm wolfless. Truly wolfless now that Morwen is gone. I have no power, no status, nothing to offer a king. You have everything I need. His voice was fierce. Courage, compassion, the ability to see past monsters to the broken creatures underneath. You walked away from my rejection with your dignity intact. You faced your worst fears to help me face mine. You forgave a 300-year-old spirit who had every reason to hate, and in doing so, you freed an entire kingdom. Tears streamed down her face. I don't know how to be a queen. Neither do I. He smiled, and the expression transformed his face from beautiful to radiant. We'll figure it out together, if you'll have me. She looked at him, this man who had terrified an entire kingdom, who had carried a curse that would have destroyed a lesser person, who had somehow maintained his humanity through 20 years of isolation and fear. Yes, she said. The word had barely left her lips before he was kissing her. This kiss was different from their first. That had been desperate, hungry, shadowed by fear of what might come. This was slow and sweet, and full of promise. When they finally parted, both of them were crying. "I love you," Cale said, the words emerging as if they'd been waiting his entire life to be spoken. "I think I've loved you since you walked away from me with your head held high." "I love you too." Sable laughed through her tears. "I think I've loved you since you kissed my hand instead of demanding to see my face." The door burst open. Odessa rushed in, her face alight with joy, then froze when she saw them. "Oh, I'm interrupting. I'll come back." "No. Stay." Sable held out her hand. "Please." Odessa approached cautiously, still uncertain of her welcome. She'd spent years believing Sable was a murderer, years avoiding her, years letting Morkant's poison infect their relationship. "I'm sorry," Odessa said, her voice breaking, "for everything, for believing him, for warning you away from Cale when I should have been warning you about our uncle, for not being there when you needed family most." Sable pulled her cousin into an embrace. "We were both manipulated, both victims, but that's over now." They held each other while Kyle watched with a soft smile. "There's something else," Odessa said when they finally separated. "Gavril's family has requested an audience. They want to apologize for the accusations they made against you, and they want to know if you'd be willing to speak at your uncle's trial." Sable's stomach clenched. The thought of facing Morkant again, and of reliving all the pain he'd caused, was almost unbearable. But then she felt Cale's hand on her shoulder, solid and warm, and she knew she wouldn't be facing it alone. "I'll speak," she said. "The truth deserves to be heard." The trial lasted 3 days. Sable testified about the years of abuse, the threats, and the constant reminders that she was worthless. Odessa testified about Morkant's obsession with the curse, his secret research, his manipulation of their entire family. Guards testified about finding evidence of shadow magic in the fire that had destroyed Sable's chambers. But it was Cale's testimony that sealed Morkant's fate. The Alpha King stood before his court and spoke openly about his curse for the first time. He described the isolation, the fear, the constant battle against the darkness inside him. He explained how Morwen's spirit had been trapped by her betrayal, how her pain had been weaponized against generation after generation of kings, and he named Morkant as the man who had killed Gavril Thornwood in cold blood, framing an innocent woman for murder to further his twisted ambitions. The verdict was unanimous: death. Sable watched from the gallery as Morkant was led away in chains. He didn't beg or plead. He simply stared at her with cold hatred, a hatred that would follow him to the executioner's block. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not grief, not even relief. Not yet. Just emptiness where fear had lived for so long. "It's over," Kyle said, appearing beside her. "Truly, over this time." "I know." She leaned into him, letting his warmth anchor her. "I just need time to believe it." The wedding took place a month later. The great hall where Sable had once stood waiting for Rejection was transformed. Flowers cascaded from every surface. Banners bearing both House Valdris and House Vorn hung side by side, and the crowds that had once whispered about the wolfless girl now cheered for their new queen. Sable walked down the aisle in a gown of silver and black, Odessa beside her as her attendant. She carried moonflowers from Cale's secret garden, the blossoms glowing faintly in the candlelight. Cale waited at the altar, and the love in his eyes as he watched her approach made her heart soar. "You look beautiful," he murmured when she reached him. "You look warm." She smiled at their private joke. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They spoke vows they'd written themselves, promises not just to love but to heal together, and to build something new from the ashes of old pain. When the priest pronounced them married, Cale kissed her before the entire kingdom. Not a polite brush of lips, a kiss that spoke of passion, of devotion, of a future stretching bright and endless before them. The crowd erupted in cheers. That night, after the feasting and dancing, after the well-wishers had finally departed, Sable and Kale stood together on the balcony of their shared chambers, looking out at the kingdom they would rule together. "I received a letter today," Kale said. "From the Eastern Kingdoms. They want to discuss trade agreements. The ones that fell through because you couldn't provide magical potions? The same. But now that the curse is lifted, now that magic users aren't treated with fear and suspicion." He smiled. "I've been thinking about establishing an academy, a place where those with gifts can learn to use them safely, productively." Sable thought about all the young people out there who might be suffering as she had suffered, believing themselves broken, hiding powers they didn't understand. "I'd like to help with that," she said, "if you'll let me." "You're my queen." Kyle pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You can do anything you want." She looked up at the stars, at the vast sky stretching above them, and felt something she'd never expected to feel: hope. She'd spent her entire life being told she was nothing, wolfless, worthless, a burden to be tolerated at best, disposed of at worst. But she wasn't nothing. She was Sable, Queen of Valdris, beloved of a king who had learned to love again because of her. She was a survivor who had faced her worst fears and emerged stronger. She was proof that the things that made you different, the things others called weaknesses, could become your greatest strengths. "What are you thinking?" Kale asked. "I'm thinking about the woman I was when I walked into that rejection ceremony." Sable smiled. She never could have imagined this. Neither could the man who rejected her. Kale's arms tightened around her. "We've both changed. For the better." "Definitely for the better." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over their kingdom. Below them, the castle buzzed with new energy. The shadow was gone. The curse was broken. And for the first time in 300 years, the future of Valdris looked bright. "I love you," Sable said. "I love you more," Kale replied. "Impossible. Want to bet?" She laughed, and the sound echoed across the mountains, carried by winds that had once howled with ancient sorrow, but now sang with joy. The mating rejection ceremony was where promises went to die. But sometimes, in the ashes of broken promises, something new could grow. Something stronger. Something beautiful. Something that would last forever. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and would like to support the channel, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and they mean more than you know. Until next time.